In this story, I'm going to tell you how a single orange toe notice threatened to steal my parking spot, my commute, and the quiet life I'd spent years building. But I didn't lash out or vandalize. I quietly gathered timestamps, recordings, and paperwork, then used that evidence to force the system to act. Stay with me. I'll show you the exact legal move that turned a manager's power into a public investigation and how you can use the same method if someone tries to take what's yours. My name is Evelyn Hart. I am 34 and I live in Portland, Oregon. I work as a barista at a neighborhood coffee shop and I take freelance landscape photos on the side, but what I really value is my quiet, orderly life after a messy divorce. I take long walks along the Willamette, I know which bakery has the best cardamom rolls, and I keep my little one-bedroom apartment neat because control helps me breathe. I have always been the kind of person who plays by the rules and tries to be polite, but lately my life had felt small and a little hollow, like someone cut a window and left a draft. I remember the exact shade of the notice taped to the lobby door, the cheap, institutional yellow of things that arrive with authority. It was mid-October, the light over the river had gone soft and bedraggled, and the building's worn brick took it like an apology. The notice announced the hire of a new property manager and a new slate of rules. No overnight guests without written permission. No packages left in the hallway. And worst for me, a parking permit system that would reassign spots, and the implication threaded through the bureaucratic language, weed out the people who didn't fit the landlord's new vision. I'd lived in the building 5 years. My car had its own little piece of routine, an angled space by the side stairwell where I could load camera gear and not worry about trucks squeezing past. My morning ritual was nearly talismanic. Wake, shower, taste the day with a strong black coffee, slide the camera bag into the passenger seat, kiss the plant on my sill, and walk out the door. The idea that someone could take that small geometry away felt like more than inconvenience. It felt like an eviction from the habits that kept me sane. Claire arrived looking like a person who owned multiple time zones. Slim, always in a tailored suit even when it was 80 degrees, with a haircut that sat like a question mark over one ear. She moved through the lot the way an inspector moves through a gallery, certain which things to praise and which to erase. That first week she handed out warnings like a new grammar for behavior. She smiled in the way people smile when they are rehearsing friendliness and nothing more. She was warm to the young professionals who spoke like they were auditioning for a startup. She was maternal to a couple of stay-at-home parents with strollers. But I was singled out immediately the second I approached the table of clipboards. She told me my paperwork was incomplete and that if I left my car without the new permit, she would tow it. Her voice had that particular quality, chorded and final, the sort pilots use to describe turbulence, and it landed in my stomach like a fist. I tried to be reasonable. I explained my hours at the coffee shop and that it was hard for me to get to the leasing office between 9 and 5. I asked for a little patience. Claire listened, smiled, and promised to review my case. When I came back the next morning, there was a bright orange notice under my windshield wiper, tow in 72 hours. That notice was a hinge. For a few weeks before, my discontent had been domestic and manageable, an edge beneath the days. The towing warning folded that edge into something warmer, angrier. For the first time in a long while, I felt the taste of being pushed. I could lose my spot, and suddenly my neat life would acquire a disruptive and humiliating footnote, hauling camera gear in the rain up a steep hill, arriving late for shifts, apologizing to managers I liked for reasons that were not mine. I tried everything I knew how to do, calling the property owner, appealing through the website, offering to meet Claire in person with my paperwork. She deflected. Her excuses were soft as velvet, but she did not move. Neighbors began to whisper. The building's social fabric rewove itself into rumor. Mrs. Alvarez in 2B said she'd been handed a ticket and only recently learned her new assigned space required her to reverse into a driveway she couldn't navigate. A man who lived on the ground floor had to move a refrigerator because the new policy suddenly forbade items in the hallway, and he cried from the strain. My building, which had previously been a place of small courtesies, lending sugar, keeping an eye on packages, felt suddenly governed by a code not written for people like us. Claire walked the lobby like a conductor, and the more I watched her, the more the notion of letting her decide my small comforts felt like surrender. At first, my efforts were cautious. A polite note slipped under her office door, an offer to drop paperwork at the landlord's office if she would issue a temporary placard. Each small request bounced back like a paper plane off a window. On a Tuesday, I parked where I always did and left my camera bag on the seat, determined not to be intimidated. I came home after a late shift to find another bright orange notice. I ripped it off the windshield in the stairwell, my heart thudding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. The next morning, I walked to her office and knocked. She looked up from her screen and smiled with a calm honed into a weapon. "Evelyn," she said with that placid tilt, "we are enforcing policy. Bring me your proofs by Friday or the car will be towed." I left and cried in the laundry room, soft, metallic sobs that made everything taste like pennies. I had tried the right channels. I had been reasonable. And yet the machine hummed on. Anger warmed in me like coffee gone from hot to something heartening. I began to imagine pushing back in a way that mattered. I did not want to be petty, but I wanted to make a claim that the rules here could not be used to strip people of the small things that keep lives manageable. I watched Claire. She had a ritual. Keys clacked at exactly 5:17 as if to mark her dominion over closing time. She smoked in the alley for a precise 14 minutes most evenings and used that time to check messages. The side gate, the small barrier between the manager's spots and the rest of the world, was sometimes propped open for 15 minutes. Without the code, only tenants with cards could enter. I timed everything with my phone like a person taking notes for a case study. I read the municipal ordinances and learned that the property owner had to issue 7 days' notice before towing for permit violations. The bright orange notices did not carry that legal mark. I had paperwork and the law on my side, but Claire still held the immediate power to make my life hard for a while. I tried legal avenues and they soothed. I emailed the landlord and got a bland, automated reply. I left polite notes and saw them ignored. Little acts of defiance flickered and sputtered. Then one night, late after a long shift, I made a careless choice. I passed the manager's car in the lot around 11:30. She was at the driver's seat, phone aglow, then slipped away to smoke. The side gate was propped open with a chipped rock. I stood there under a sodium lamp and felt my pulse in my throat. I thought of small, precise revenge, nothing cruel, only a recalibration. A manager placard, I thought, was silly but symbolic. It would not hurt anyone and it might make her notice that she could be displaced. I slipped through the gate and reached over to the dashboard. The placard said manager in glossy plastic, the kind of thing that feels official despite being trivial. I tucked it behind a box of old mail near the lobby and walked home with my breath tucked in my chest. The next morning, another orange notice fluttered under my windshield, and an additional bulletin on the lobby board announced that parking enforcement would begin in 48 hours. Neighbors buzzed. The old man from downstairs had been assigned a new space half a block away. I felt an odd mix of satisfaction. Tiny theft had rebalanced something in me, and dread. My act had been small and petty, but it had not solved anything. Claire escalated. She left notes with aggressive language, checked cars at odd hours, installed a second lock on the gate so only her key would work. When residents asked gently for clarity, she smiled and dismissed them. I made an error that cost me an alibi. In a fit of frustration, I wrote a complaint to the owner, and in a line I thought private, I wrote that Claire was playing with other people's stability for sport. The owner forwarded the email to Claire, probably with an earnest suggestion to resolve human conflict. Claire, with the practiced composure she wore like armor, slapped an official violation on my file for harassment. I had to appear for a hearing. Sitting across a table from her in that tiny office, listening to her recite policies and show a log of notices, I felt small and exposed. She was immaculate and persuasive. The hearing went against me on a technicality. I was fined and told my case would be reviewed again in 30 days. I left the building shaking, the sort of furious that is precise and cold. I had not meant to end up here. I had merely wanted to be left alone. I sat on a bench and watched the street's ordinary choreography: mothers bundling children, a cyclist struggling with a flat tire, an office worker falling into coffee fueled speed. Watching people perform the small, undramatic parts of their days steadied me. Then I made a decision. If the system would be used to punish me, I would use the system to expose her. But I would do it cleanly, legally, patiently, with a ledger of proof. I borrowed my friend Marco's compact digital recorder and a small wireless camera used for his landscaping business. For 2 weeks, I became methodical. I recorded interactions in common areas where notice signs said CCTV might be in use and where expectations of privacy were limited. I logged every orange notice, every ambiguous sentence on the lobby board, timestamps and all. My notes got obsessively neat. I labeled every file, printed receipts, and wrote down every conversation with times and places. I learned to watch without heat. My anger turned into the steady observation of an investigator. The recordings were a slow harvest. In one clip, Claire told a tenant she was cleaning up the building by getting rid of problem residents. In another, she let slip that the owner preferred not to be bothered. and that enforcement was simply easier than managing complaints. The language rang in my head like a key in a lock. I recorded an old neighbor being told he would lose his spot for a couple of late payments, when in fact, a different tenant with similar slips had never been threatened. I had copies of the orange warnings with dates that didn't match the gate's automation logs. I compiled the messy truth into neat stacks of evidence. Then I walked the packets to the City Housing Bureau. The clerk who took my complaint had the kind of practiced sympathy that smelled faintly of old coffee and government forms. She agreed there was enough here to open an investigation if I supplied documents and recordings. I hand-delivered folders to the landlord, to the bureau, and to the small tenants group we had cobbled together for the hearing. I sent neighbors a clear, calm note titled, Review Requested, Potential Selective Enforcement of Parking Policies. I kept my language factual because rumor and rage would dilute the work. Claire met the city investigators with a smile that faltered once when the gate log timestamps contradicted her notes. She produced tidy files that unraveled under scrutiny. The parking vendor confirmed the 7-day notice requirement had not been met. The housing investigators' questions pried at the seams. I watched from a hall, hands jammed into my pockets, as her composure cracked like old glass. The landlord called an emergency meeting that afternoon. The small lounge filled with neighbors and a hum of anxious voices. People spoke, quietly, firmly, of threats and inconsistency, and of being made to feel like intruders in their own homes. At the end of the meeting, the landlord asked Claire to step aside while the review was completed and reassigned management duties temporarily. He put a hand on her shoulder and gave instructions that sounded like succor but read like removal. I felt a cold, fierce jolt curl through me, relief that the harassment would stop, and a complicated shame at the pleasure of seeing someone unseated. Claire was escorted out with her purse and a face that could no longer sustain the practiced smile. The outcome was not sweet victory so much as a flattening, a correction. The Housing Bureau fined the management company for failing to meet notification requirements and required training on tenant rights. Claire was transferred to a corporate administrative role. She was not fired, but she no longer wielded the on-site power to hold a towing sticker over someone's head. I still had to park farther away for a short time while reassignment resolved, and I still checked the lobby board with the kind of habitual nervousness I'd cultivated. But my spot, and with it my small freedoms, slowly returned. There was one last note of indignity. Weeks later, Claire sent a terse email accusing an anonymous tenant of stealing a manager placard and threatened to report them for replacement costs. I forwarded the email to the Housing Bureau and added it to the growing file. The Bureau replied that they had my original packet and the new accusation would be logged. Mostly what I wanted at the start was restored. My ordinary days, the angle of my car by the stairwell, the ritual of loading camera gear without fumbling. I had not learned to enjoy conflict. I had learned to channel irritation into something useful, evidence and persistence. I did not celebrate loud or dramatic. I drank coffee on my porch and watched the river keep moving. Sometimes a neighbor catches my eye and says, "Thanks, Evelyn." Those two words are enough. They are better than anger and quieter than revenge.